My name is Richard Fishburn, and I began attending CLT full-time in August of 2011, and I became the pastor in September of 2015. I actually grew up going to church. My dad is a pastor about 20 minutes from here, and so I grew up going to a different church. But then when God led me to Christian Life Tabernacle, it was about 3 years after the initial call to come to Christian Life Tabernacle that I was able to come, and so I have been here ever since. God has delivered me from depression and suicidal thoughts. When I was growing up, I never really learned how to pour out my thoughts and my feelings, my emotions to God, but rather I would internalize them. And so in the meantime, things would build up. And that eventually, through my high school years, trying to find myself, trying to fit in, and in all reality, running from the call of God. Because I grew up in a pastor's home, I knew behind the scenes of what happens. I remember times as a child that my parents would bring us into the living room and have to tell us about a situation or a family, things going on, so we weren't caught off guard. And over the years of all of that building up and not learning to give it to God and let Him handle it, it turned into depression. And so I would say it was really before I began coming to CLT. There are a few moments in my life that really propelled me into deliverance. The first one being when I was a teenager. And I remember walking into my parents' house, and they were in a meeting with an individual that I felt had hurt me, had hurt someone that was close to me. And I remember walking up the stairs into my bedroom, and I collected knives. And I remember reaching over on my dresser and grabbing a knife and thinking, you know what? If all life is about is people hurting me, then what's the point? And I remember the distinct feeling of opening that knife and dragging the blade that would cut paper easily across my throat. But it wouldn't cut. It wouldn't break the skin. And I remember getting frustrated. And I held up my arm and I began trying to slash at my wrists and harm myself. But it wouldn't make a scratch. And I remember in that moment God saying, no. No. And He kept speaking. He kept talking to me. And as I began to understand that God was speaking to me, I stopped what I was doing. And He said, no, there are people that only you can reach. And it's not your time. And this is not my will for you. And so I remember my hands started to shake. The knife dropped out onto the floor. And I started praying. And I remember there was another moment in my life, and that situation was the beginning of the breaking of that stronghold in my life. There was another time that I was praying, and I felt like the presence of God was so strong that if I opened my eyes, Jesus would be standing in front of me. And I was just worshiping and praising God. And I remember opening my eyes several times just to see if what I was feeling was really there. And He wasn't there physically, but He was there in spirit. And I remember feeling His love and His power invade that place, that room. And later on, several years several years later, I was faced with a situation and I had to make some hard decisions. And sometimes when you make decisions, not everybody's happy, and I understand that. But I remember feeling broken again. And I actually came here to CLT, and I was in the prayer room, and it was late one night, and I was the only one here. And I remember laying on the floor. I said, God, I know that this is your will for my life. Not everybody understands. God, I don't want to be bitter. And so I asked God to take the hurt and take the pain, take the bitterness. And I remember him pulling that out of me. And it was in that moment that I realized I can give God my emotions. I can give him my hurts. I can give him my feelings because he cares. Since that moment, I've realized that he is a loving father. Well, I got a revelation of what the word says when it tells us to cast our cares upon him. And there have been times since then where that spirit of depression, which is what it was for me, a spirit of depression and oppression and suicidal thoughts, there have been times where that's tried to come back in and reassert itself. But now I recognize it, and I'm able to say, no, we're not going there. I'm not going there anymore. There have been moments where I've been at work or I've been on job sites. Right after my wife and I first got married, it happened several times, where I would be overcome with the spirit of fear, where I would think, or I would begin to wonder and worry about what would happen if something happened to my family. And really what it was a spiritual attack against my mind. And now that I've recognized it, I'm able to put it in its place, to operate in boldness and authority as a child of God, and to cast those thoughts and those imaginations down. I would tell you, if you're facing that situation, if you're facing oppression and depression, if you're having suicidal thoughts, I would tell you that there's hope. I mean, there really is hope. You don't have to live with that burden. This is my testimony. This is what God's done for me. And you've seen other videos of other folks here at Christian Life who God has worked in their lives. And part of the meaning of the word testimony is that if God's done it once, he will and he can do it again. He's no respecter of persons. If he's done it for me, if he's done it for those that I go to church with, that I'm privileged to be pastor of, I know he can do it for you. Reach out. There's hope.